Great. Yeah, so like Garrett said,
Fine.
I'm yeah, not too far away, similar climate, similar fruits. And I yeah, and I'm actively like I work here on the farm, active in managing all these things. Um, we don't just do organic pest management here, but we do, yeah, we do all the above. So I'm familiar with all of it and happy to share what I know. I'm going to start my. You should be seeing the slides, correct?
Yep, looks
Yes.
good.
Okay. So, yeah, this talk is going to focus on organic pest management practices. The outline is I'm going to start with the most important for organic, which is weed management, especially when your fruit plants are young, and talk about how and when and why it's so important. And then I'll talk about some of the common disease and insect pests we have in apples, pears, and cherries. And then also talk a little bit about managing the little critters, which can be really damaging, especially if you're growing dwarfing and semi-dwarfing fruits. So I always start with emphasizing that it could be worse. We have very cool and dry climates, which makes managing bugs and diseases a lot easier. On this slide shows a typical vineyard spray scouting calendar for a vineyard in the Midwest, where it's, yeah, in other areas in the Midwest, the Northeast, they're basically having to spray every 7 to 10 days for bugs and disease with that in those more humid, warm climates. But with that, with our cool, dry climates, it does make the impacts of weeds larger because our soils aren't that rich. They don't hold on to nutrients and water that much. And weeds, all plants eat basically the same thing. So weeds are competing for that water and those scarce nutrients. When you're managing weeds, it's important to be able to focus your effort and know when that competition has the greatest effects. Yeah, and so that's those effects are particularly strong when the orchard is getting established, when those tree roots, plant roots are small, and those can create a long-term lagging growth that weed competition super early, because during the season you're not only putting on that growth and growing that fruit, but you're also setting the flower buds for the next year. So yeah, trees, bushes will remember that early stress, and it can often take years to recover. The other critical period is in the season. So not just when the plants are young for those first 2, 3, 4 years, but also in the season. Most of that growth that's in that acquisition of nutrients is happening early, sort of May to July. And the weeds that come in on the fall or in the fall aren't going to do as much. So I've got a few examples that I'll show you. So this is a old study from Cornell University with semi-dwarfing apples, where they're measuring the trunk growth in the first year. So you have the check where it was, and these are different durations of weeding. So check where it wasn't weeded for very long and the trunk grew very little. And then May to July is where having it weed free for that spring to midsummer period had the most increase in growth. And getting back to this point about how trees remember, so they came back to these trees 3 years later and looked, or 2 years later, and looked at the amount of fruit on them. And again, in that, so this is in kilograms, so each kilogram is about 2 pounds of fruit per tree. Where it was weedy, you basically had an apple, one apple. And then in that May to July period, you have about 10 pounds of apples. And here's another example in grapevines where they ran different periods of weed control. So this is showing the trunk growth in cross-sectional area with 0 weeks of weed control up to kind of full season weed control.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
We have grapes as well, and I discovered last year I had planted some pollinator flowers, mostly just calendula, underneath them, and the grapes did not like that at all.
No.
And so they probably felt like they were leaves, and so we've taken all of that out. So can I expect that those grapevines are going to remember that and stunted because of that?
There will be some it, but if you get it out of there, you're moving in the right direction. But it might take a year or two.
Okay.
But on this relationship, you can see like after about 3 months of being weed free, you're getting all the benefit you're going to get. So that later weeds, like I was emphasizing before, weeds later in the season as we get past midsummer or into the fall don't matter as much in terms of direct competition. And here's some pictures of those vines. Again, with 0 weeks weed free up to 12 weeks weed free. Massive difference in the growth and ability to set fruit the next year. Okay. This is another example with how wide you should keep that strip of weed free with grapes. And so this is different widths of the herbicide strip going from 0, so this is be weedy, 1 meter, 1.5 meter, and so on up to 3.5 meters. Then that's really wide. No, actually, this is in feet, not meters. Sorry, they're mixing their units, and I'm getting confused. So 0 to 3.5 feet, and this is the fruit put on in kilograms per vine. So much larger. Basically, keeping it weed free out to the edge of the canopy is a good rule of thumb.
Okay.
So how do we do this organically? Hoeing and cultivation work really well when the weeds are very small. You can do a lot. When you're targeting those seedlings, but if you have a lot of area, that's a lot to keep up with and can take a lot of time. Mulching is probably the better, using thick organic mulches or just weed barrier fabrics. Mowing is really just a rescue treatment. If you're letting those weeds get big and mow them down, they're still taking a lot of water and nutrients. But it can help reduce the weed seed inputs and how weedy it is the next year. Herbicides, there are good organic herbicides for small annual weeds, but they can be quite expensive and not economical on the large scale. So inorganic.
I have a question, Zach.
Let me get to the end, and then sure. I've got a bunch of mini breaks for questions.
Great.
In large organic orchards and vineyards, they will have specialized cultivation equipment that's not really usually too expensive for backyard operations. Weed barrier is a better option for most backyard orchards and vineyards. Good professional grade weed barrier can last 5 to 8 years. Can also add additional benefits by warming the soil and sort of increasing the breakdown of organic matter and releasing more nutrients. The cons are that it can attract voles and gophers and make it difficult to add soil amendments, fertilizers and whatnot, compost. So a better solution is to use 2 strips that can be pulled back, 2 strips of weed fabric that can be pulled back in the winter. This is an example of an organic orchard that we had where we pulled back the weed fabric, and you can see all of the vole damage on the trunks of these cherries. Voles and gophers really love cover, and you're making a lot of cover. But if you use 2 strips like this, you can pull them back in the winter to open up that area, to add your organic fertilizers and to expose those rodents to predators. And it's often over the winter when those voles and gophers are doing the most damage. So to review the weed management stuff and open it up for questions, remember the critical periods of control. The first few years after planting are super important. In the season, it's really flowering to harvest. With apples, it's a little bit before harvest, but that first half of the season is most important to manage those weeds. Generally, it's best to main a weed-free area out to the drip line or the edge of the canopy. And so you can use different tactics with organic herbicides, hoeing, mulches, and physical barriers, weed barriers to get it done. And do take the hard, easy approach, because if you can do well in those first few years after planting, your trees will be off to a much better start and be much more resilient to weed competition and much more competitive for weeds that might come in underneath once they get some size on them. And also, by keeping it weed free, you're reducing the weed seed banks, and you'll reduce that weed pressure over time. So yeah, now happy to take any questions about weed management.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So, one of my little orchards, like mixed varieties of apples and pears and plums and stuff like that. They're about 2 years old, and they're in a field that used to be alfalfa.
Mhm.
So I have these really deep-rooted alfalfa weeds, and I was curious, like, how much damage I would do to the fruit tree roots, given that they are pretty small. They're only like about 2-year-old since I planted them. And should I be considering like stuff like weed barrier or that sort of weeding mechanism instead of just like hand weeding and trying to get really deep in there to actually get one of those alfalfa roots out, which is very hard.
Yeah, if I would give a weed barrier a try first, because if you can mow those alfalfa crowns down really low and get it on really early, I think you'd at least weaken them. And I've not had to do it with alfalfa, but I would imagine that's what I would try first.
Okay. And then a follow-up about the voles. That was great information about how they do like that cover of the weed barrier. So like when would I pull it back after leaving it on for the alfalfa top growing season? When's like the earliest that I could pull away that weed barrier? Let the
In like
fox
late
eat the
September,
voles?
early October.
Okay. Great,
And-
thank you.
yeah, and then the alfalfa may be significantly weakened because it hasn't been able to grow, and you might be able to pop it out easier in the fall.
So I noticed in your picture that these trees are growing in grass, and we have a few trees that are actually growing really close to grass. So would the grass then also be considered a competing weed for the apple and apricot trees?
Yeah, it is. If you can keep the grass again, are these big old trees or
The
new?
apricot tree is very old, probably, oh, I don't know, maybe 30 years old, 25, 30 years
Yeah.
old.
I mean, if you
The,
can keep the weeds down out to that drip line, uh, the tree will grow better and produce more fruit. The other thing you can consider is if it is growing in sod, if the tree is growing in sod, you just need to fertilize and water to take into account that the sod's going to soak up most of it. And yeah, and basically fertilize a little bit more and water a little bit more to make sure the tree's getting what it needs.
yeah, the apple trees are probably 5 or 6 years old, and they put on their most growth last year. So we were thinking about just taking the grass out beyond the drip line so that, but it likes to encroach. It's like a never-ending battle.
Yeah,
I-
especially with things like quackgrass that grow through rhizomes and runners and can poke through love bark mulch and straw mulch and can poke through some of the weaker weed barriers.
Okay,
But
so what they're not in quackgrass, they're just in regular
yeah,
turf, but that it's still old hardy turf that wants to take over. So would it be a good idea that is take it back to the drip line and
Yep.
then either we have been mulching it and that helps some, but would it be useful then just to put some landscape cloth on it?
Yeah.
Or
especially like if you can cut back the sod and put the landscape fabric down, it'll do a better job. And then you can if you want to, for aesthetics, put mulch on top of the landscape fabric. It'll be harder to pull it back, but
yeah.
I've seen people use like river rock on top of landscape fabric, and that does discourage the voles from crawling around under there because it's heavier.
Okay. Yeah, so fertilizing would be a little more challenging.
You would want to
adding-
use, yeah, you'd want to use something that's water soluble. And you can get organic fish emulsions and things like that you can just water in. But for adding compost or other dry organic fertilizers, it would make it a lot harder.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Any other weed questions? Again, yeah, it's so you'll see such a difference when you focus those weed management efforts on the younger trees. They can really get going so much faster. So on to disease. This is the most common disease, and it's the only disease that we really have that can kill trees. And so this is really the only disease I'm going to focus on. It's fire blight. It's caused by a bacteria, Erwinia amylovera. It's spread by bees that pick it up from overwintering infections, and it gets into the blossoms And if it's warm during bloom, above 60 during bloom, you'll see the flowers collapse and shoot collapse. That's the fire blight name. It looks like parts of the trees have been burned. And we see it most often in apples and pears. It's also it's a pathogen that is in many different kinds of plants in the flowers. And a lot of the ornamental and wild plants that have it don't develop disease, but will harbor the bacteria. So it is kind of everywhere all the time, even though we don't see it. So this is a quick life cycle. We're here in the spring. Old cankers will start to weep an orangish ooze, which is picked up by insects and brought to the flowers, mainly bees, bring it into the flowers. It colonizes the tip of the flower. And if it's warm during bloom, the bacteria will reproduce very rapidly and get down into the base of the flower and then moves back into the shoots, clogging up the plumbing, all the vessels in those shoots, and you see it start to collapse. If that runs back into a larger part of the trunk or a big scaffold branch, that'll continue to ooze and start the cycle over. And it can continue on within the season if left untreated. The main thing to remember is it's a bacteria that's everywhere all the time, but it's only causing problems if it's warm during bloom. And wetting, like rain, helps splash is important too, because rain or heavy dews will help splash that bacteria down into the flower bases and make the disease worse. So this is what those cankers can look like, or the sources of infection can look like early in the spring. Kind of a weeping, sunken area in the bark. If you see them now, you can treat them with copper sprays. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Or if you've seen, if you can prune it out, it's good to prune it out now if it's in an area that one can prune out. Fire blight can be most damaging in very young trees. This is a picture from Washington or Oregon where in a newly planted orchard where fire blight got out of control and all these brown trees are dying back because of fire blight. It's often worse in young trees because they're being heavily fertilized and pushed for growth. And it can be a real mess. And especially because on some of the rootstocks used for apple, the older cold hardy rootstocks are really susceptible to fire blight. And once the fire blight gets into it, there's no cure. And that tree is basically dead sometime in the near future. So don't pick fights. The best way to avoid issues with fire blight is not picking fights you can't win. Avoid very susceptible varieties like Wealthy, Cortland, Ginger Gold, Golden Delicious, Lodi. And M26 and Nick 29 rootstocks are common cold hardy rootstocks that are really susceptible. There's a lot of new rootstocks that are quite resistant. So how do you manage this? You can use Utah traps, so use a model that will tell you if it's been warm enough during bloom to be worried. It also depends on if you've had infections in your neighborhood, not just in your orchard, but if you see trees in the area, because again, bees move up to a mile. And what these models will do is just track how much it's been over 60 and for how long over a 4-day window for when you're in bloom. So if you go on, yeah, Garrett's got it set up. So this Utah Traps has salmon and chalice on there. You can select that station, go to a pest activity summary where that blue arrow is showing, and you can select fire blight. What you can do to manage fire blight is, again, it's mostly a very threatening issue in very young trees because the disease can run back into the trunk and into the rootstock really easily. So removing blossoms for the first 2 to 3 years is not a bad idea. There's not so many, you can just pinch them off. For organic management, the main tool is, beyond removing blooms and planting resistant varieties, is to spray copper salts or copper soaps on the blossoms during bloom. You can get a little bit more fruit russeting with copper, but it's really a kind of a minor cosmetic issue. It's just a little bit of sort of reddish orange rough spots towards the top of the apple. This is one example of an organic copper fungicide, a copper soap. These are available at most lawn and garden centers. It's the same stuff that people use for roses and other garden plants. So on that, so this is an example for salmon right now. On Utah traps, it shows that you're really low risk, and it shows the risk broken down into if you had blight in your orchard last year, if it was nearby, or you didn't have any. Right now it's all low, but as it starts to warm up and we get into bloom, those different levels will change. Based on if your history with fire blight. It's also important to remember that when you spray for fire blight, you're only treating the blossoms that are open right then. So if the risk continues to be high, you should reapply that copper or pinch blossoms off because new blooms will be opening up in the next few days. It's often a big issue in late blooms. So like on a tree, you might have a few blooms that open up weeks after the main bloom, and that's often where fire blight gets going. So if you see those sort of lingering blooms, just pinch them off. That's where a lot of the risk is, because it tends to be warmer then, and that bacteria has just been building up on your trees through the rest of bloom. So on the website, you can select the different risk categories when you go into that, and it'll use the current weather and the next 7-day forecast. It's already integrated in there. If you see infections, if you see those blossoms collapsing, if you see shoots start to have that burnt look to them, the best thing is to just cut it out as soon as you see it, and keep cutting it out as you see more. Cutting into healthy wood, which is 6 to 10 inches beyond the obvious signs of infection. There's a lot of extension materials that say you need to sanitize your pruners between every cut, which has been tested in many commercial orchards, and it's really not necessary. The main thing is just cutting into healthy wood, and you will not spread it by pruning it out. Okay. So for summary for fire blight, it's the one disease I'm going to talk about, because the other diseases we have are occasional and only cause some slight cosmetic blemishes on the fruit. Fire blight is the one that can kill young trees, especially on susceptible rootstocks and varieties. The easiest thing to do is just remove the blooms for the first few years. Always look at planting resistant varieties. In that slide where I talked about resistant varieties. There's a great list from Cornell. The other thing to point out about resistant varieties is fire blight resistance is kind of a slippery thing because it's very place-based. Resistance is often based on does this variety show fire blight or get fire blight often? And that depends on where it's grown, because if it's grown in an area where when it blooms, it tends to be cool below 60 degrees, it doesn't show the disease. And that's the case with most of our pear varieties. They can be susceptible, but because they're the first thing to bloom, and it's often like my pears are in full bloom right now, they're at very low risk for fire blight because it's just not going to be warm enough to cause the disease. If you do have susceptible varieties and the weather is warm during bloom, you can spray copper. And if you see infections, prune it out early and often. And in a young tree, sometimes people hem and haw because to cut 6 inches back means they have to cut half the trunk off. You will be better off cutting half the trunk off and regrowing that trunk if it does have fire blight, because if it gets back into the trunk and into the roots, that tree will die over the course of a couple seasons, or if not that season. Any questions about fire blight? Anyone seen fire blight?
Yeah, I have had some in one of my trees, but I did cut it out.
Yeah.
Seems to have managed it well.
Yeah, and in old trees, they're not growing very fast. It tends to spread a lot slower, so it's easy to just manage by pruning. But again, in young trees, just pinch those blossoms off. There's not so many, but especially on apple and pear trees that are on more dwarfing rootstocks, they want to bloom and set fruit a lot in the second and third year. It's just easier to pinch off those blossoms and keep them safe. I wanted to say something about how do we spray our backyard trees, because while a commercial orchard might have an orchard sprayer that's specifically designed to coat whole trees, we don't have those tools. It's often confusing. You want to follow the label of whatever product you have, whether it's the copper soap, so I'll talk about some other organic insecticides, but it's usually mixing it to a certain dilution, and it'll say spray until drip off, which means you're just spraying the tree until you see that that spray start to drip off the leaves, and then you move on to a different area. Hose end sprayers for backyard trees can be a much easier and safer way to go. This type, which is available at most lawn garden centers or something like this, has a dial that you set to the dilution you need, and you'll add the product into this reservoir beneath and then attach your hose over here. You have some different spray nozzle options. And then a lot of products are available with a hose end sprayer, and so this is the reservoir with the product, and it'll just do the dilution for you. These are really nice because they're much better than mixing up a pressurized sprayer, because the droplets are very large, and so it has a less tendency to drift. In other words, drift back on you. You don't have to get up in a ladder, because these will reach 15 to 20 feet high in a big old standard size tree. So now into codling moth. Codling moth is probably the biggest insect pest for our pears and apples. And if you can control codling moth, you're taking care of most of the other insect pests in apples. its life cycle, the larvae are in the bark or sometimes in the soil at the base of the tree. In the spring, they pupate, hatch out into moths that usually come out around apple bloom. They lay eggs on the leaves and on the fruit. Those eggs hatch and the larva will eat leaves and burrow into the fruit to eat the seeds, go through that life cycle 2 to 3 times a year. And remember that there's more than one generation, because a lot of people do a great job on the first generation and then forget. They can be issues in apples and pears, but they also can live in hawthorns and can also affect plums. The adults are these small moths, kind of nondescript with this copper band on the back. Unless you put out specific traps for cuddling moth, you probably won't see these. They are not the target. They do not cause damage. They barely eat. They mainly just mate and lay eggs. You can use a pheromone-baited trap and hang it in your trees if you want to monitor when the adults are active. This is, for some reason, scientists make up new words for simple things. That's what's referred to as biofix, because you fix the point in that moth's biology when they're out. Large orchards can manage the adults by using mating disruption. This is hanging pheromone lures throughout the orchard, and it basically puts so much pheromone, or these sex hormones that the moths use to find each other. It puts so much out there that they can't find each other, but it only works if you have like a 5-acre or larger orchard. If you try it on a smaller orchard, you just pull more moths into your area. So we don't target the adults. We don't really have to worry about them. We're targeting the larvae and the eggs. The larvae feed on leaves, fruits, and seeds. They're mainly eating just the seeds in the inside of the apple, and then they'll burrow out, start the next generation. For spraying, you can work harder and not smarter. You can start applying 2 weeks after bloom, and then apply every 10 to 14 days until mid-September, and that's 9 to 12 applications per season. Or you can work smarter and not harder and use a model and use these temperature-based spray dates to get those first two generations and get it down to 2 to 4 well-timed sprays per season. There are some lookalikes with codling moth. There's apple maggot, which is not a pest that I see here very much, but it is more common. It is present in Montana, and I think it's present in Idaho. It is another fly larva that will burrow just underneath the skin. You'll see these trails. You don't see these kind of frass-filled exit holes like you will with codling moth. And I've not seen an apple maggot in this part of the country. In our area, if we don't treat, we'll have up to 95% of the fruit with one wormhole in it. It's really hard to find fruit without a wormhole. And then managing codling moth, if you use those spray dates for codling moth, you'll take care of most of the other kind of minor pests of apple and pear, like the leaf rollers shown there that's webbed up that leaf and rolled it up, and the leaf skeletonizers, which are also pretty common. Not that damaging, but you'll have a happier tree, and you'll control those by just managing a codling moth. To manage it, again, we're targeting eggs and the larvae, not the adults. You can use horticultural oil to smother those eggs after they've been laid. It's optional. A lot of people just skip this part, but if you're managing organically, it can give you a little bit of extra control. To do the timing, again with Utah traps, there are two options for the timing, and they're actually quite similar. There's fixed biofix, which is just a modeled biofix, which uses the growing degree days and elevation of your site to predict when those moths are out and active. We've compared those models to when we've trapped at multiple sites across Montana, and it's usually pretty accurate within 2 to 10 days. It's close enough for managing. Or you can get those traps and pheromone lures, put it out now, and trap when you've got more than 2 moths on more than 2 consecutive days, and then send that information into Utah State University. Mayor Murray is the contact person there, and they will update the model for that location, for that weather station, based on an actual trapped codling moth when the adults were active. But again, the modeled or fixed biofix is usually accurate enough, and you don't have to be out there checking a trap. So this is your traps calendar for now, and where it shows highlighted in orange on that graph, this is showing the heat units as we've gone through the spring. Where it's highlighted in orange dots on the graph, it's a management action. You can click on it and it says what that action is. Here, this first action is put your traps up right about now, because we're getting close to apple bloom. And then this next is when it's predicting you should start catching them towards the end of this month and the beginning of May. So for that optional oil application to smother eggs, the model will tell you when the eggs are laid and when they're going to start hatching. And it'll say this is when you can put on oil to smother the eggs. A lot of people get confused because this is often called a dormant oil. So they think that the plants need to be dormant, and that is not true. You can apply it during the growing season. It's often applied when the trees are dormant to smother aphid eggs and other things that overwinter as eggs on the bark. You will mix up a 1 to 2% solution in water. That's 2.5 to 5 tablespoons a gallon. And then spray it on the tree, getting good coverage. With oil, it's kind of more is better. You're trying to coat every part that might have eggs, and you need contact. You need to cover it with that spray to have it have any effect. It's totally safe to put on after the trees are leafed out. The timing for this is typically about a week to 2 weeks after bloom. The other thing that's important, and you'll apply a few 2 to 3 times in that first generation, and then once per in that second generation. If you're going to use this approach, buy an organic horticultural oil. Don't use neem oil. It's a lot less expensive, so it's about 1/3 of the cost. And neem oil can burn leaves if it's put on in hot weather. A lot of people think these are the same thing. Neem oil is much more expensive, and it's a little bit more harsh on the plant. With any oil, avoid applying on drought-stressed plants because it's going to kind of it coats the leaves and slows their ability to breathe and release moisture. And for most of your plants in the backyard, this isn't going to be an issue.
So do you want me to wait till the end for questions?
Yeah, I've got a break at the end of codling moth and we're almost there.
Okay.
Thinning your fruit helps with codling moth. They like to burrow into the sides of apples when they're all tight and packed together in those clusters. So thinning down to one fruit per cluster can help. It also helps with alternate bearing when you have a tree that's producing a bumper crop one year and hardly anything or nothing the next year. Thinning helps with this a lot. Organic sprays need to be applied slightly more often than conventional sprays because they break down in sunlight and tend to wash off more easily with rain. So for the sprays that target the larva, you will apply once the eggs start hatching. Again, the Utah Traps model will tell you when those eggs are starting to hatch. That hatch takes 2 to 3 weeks. So put on a spray at about 5 to 10% hatch, and then put another one on 7 to 10 days later, because that, or if it's rained a little bit earlier, because that product will have broken down. The options for organic are spinosad, which is sold under a lot of different, that is the active ingredient. It's sold under a lot of different brand names. It's the most effective and long-lasting organic spray available, and you can find it in most garden centers. BT or Bacillus thuringiensis is a caterpillar-specific toxin, organic toxin. Well, it's a bacteria that makes this caterpillar-specific toxin. It's less effective. It does work. It has a limited shelf life, but it is available most places. Other less available organic options are a granulosis virus that is specific to codling moth, which a lot of commercial organic orchards use, and kaolin clay or surround, which is kind of it's a whitewash that's used in a lot of organic fruit orchards, and it's kind of a physical barrier feeding deterrent that's used for a variety of pests. In managing the codling moth, remember there's a second generation. Use the model because the timing of that second generation is more variable because it's climate based. So if we have a cool summer, it's going to be stretching into August, and if it's really hot, it'll be mid to late July. That second generation is what does a lot of the fruit damage and all damage to the fruit and pears, because pears in that first generation, pears are too little and hard for the moths for the larvae to get into them. And so, yeah, remember that there's a second one. And if we have a really warm summer, there can be a third generation that would need to be treated again. That model will tell you if that's the case. It's fairly rare here that we have a third generation. And with managing the eggs and larvae for codling moth, you can just treat the lower part of the tree in a large tree where you want some nice apples. Localized control works really well. And you can have some non-wormy apples in just a part of the tree if that's what you want for your management. Non-spray options. You can just use wormy apples. They're really fine for making cider or baking. The larvae have already gotten out of them. It doesn't really affect the flavor. They don't store well, but I know lots of folks who use wormy apples for a lot of different apple products, pear products. You can use exclusion. You can put insect-proof bags around the fruit and the trees. You have to apply it before that first generation larvae are active. So within 2 weeks after bloom, when the fruit are kind of dime-sized, there's a lot of individual fruit bags that are on the market, and you can even use Ziploc bags or pantyhose. Maggot barriers is the common one in the market. They are, if you really have a lot of extra time, they're an option, but they are incredibly labor intensive, and it's so hard to put a bag on a dime-sized fruitlet, and they can blow off. We've done trials with this, and Ziplocs and maggot barrier plus kaolin, soaking that maggot barrier in kaolin can provide some protection, get you down to 15-20% of the fruit with wormholes in it. So it gives you about 80% protection. This is some examples from our trials with the Ziplocs. We had earwigs that wanted to get in there, and some codling moth would just eat through the plastic. When we just used the maggot barriers, a lot of the codling moth just ate through the maggot barrier alone. If you do want to use a non-spray option, whole tree bagging is the way to go. If you have a smaller tree, what we did was get ag fabric, insect barrier netting. It was about $50 a tree for a 30 by 16 sheet, and we just sewed it together to make a 16 by 15 foot bag. And you can just lift it over the tree with a PVC pole and bring it down around and zip tie it at the base. When we did this, we had less than 10% of the apples had wormholes versus 90% where we didn't. And it took about 10 minutes per tree to apply and take it off at the end of the season. Yeah, I've never had. Yeah, we put individual fruit bags around thousands of apples for this trial, and I've never had a crew more unhappy with the research because it was so tedious. And when we started doing this, they were very excited. So to summarize for codling moth, you're treating the eggs and the larvae, not the adults. You should be safe and never spray insecticides during bloom. That's when the adults are out, but you're not targeting them. Typically, that first generation spray starts a couple weeks after the last blossoms fall off. Work smarter, not harder. Use that model-based timing to cut your number of sprays down to 3 or 4 a summer, and you will have good control. There are a lot of organic options for the eggs. Again, that model, the Utah Traps model, will tell you when to spray on oil. Use Omri oils, horticultural oils, rather than neem oil. You'll save a lot of money, and it's safer for the plants. And for larvae, spinosad is the most available and most effective for backyard orchards. And you can get it in a hose end sprayer. And remember to check that model and manage that second generation, and you will have a lot less worms and a lot less other insect pests in your apples and pears. Any questions on codling moth?
Zach,
Yeah.
are there any varieties that you've noticed that maybe are, surely they're not, completely codling moth free, but pears are a little harder, right? Or are there any apple varieties that maybe don't get it as bad?
That one that you and I collected, the Arkansas black twig, hard storage, which is a hard storage apple. And I have noticed that those harder, sort of late maturing old storage apples tend to not have as many wormholes. But they're not like they're often not the apples you would want to eat off the tree. They're the kind of apple, like old storage varieties. These are older varieties that were used for storage, where you'd pick them, put them in a root cellar, and they start to be good to eat in December, January, because it'd finally soften up. But for most of the eating varieties, I have not.
I have a question as well.
Yeah.
So are the sprayers, can you use the same ones for the dormant oils as well as the stuff like spinosad? Or do
Totally.
you need to separate those?
No, you just, I mean, you wouldn't spray it at the same time, but just clean it out, run clean water through it, and it should be fine. And
Awesome.
So I have a
And-
viburnum tree that loves, aphids love it. So it's not blooming yet and the leaves are out. So would this be a good time to spray it with the dormant spray?
yeah, yep.
The,
And those
Snow-
dormant, yeah, those oils you can use anytime in the late winter, early spring to really target those, and even into the growing season. But those dormant oils for like aphid eggs work great. The earlier the better, because you can just coat the shoots and the trunk really well. You don't have anything in the way. But yeah, you can apply that now.
and so just to be clear, I can do a or an oil-based dormant spray during apple tree and pear tree bloom. Is that what you were saying?
No, you don't have to do it during, it's safe during bloom, but you're targeting the eggs of codling moth for this, and that those sprays to target the eggs of codling moth will usually be a week to 2 weeks after bloom.
So when the blooms drop.
Yeah, but if you do, the oil is one of the few things that if you spray it during bloom, you're not going to target the eggs because they're not there for codling moth, but you're also not going to harm the bees because it's just oil.
Okay, okay.
It just coats the eggs, yeah, with that oil and interferes with their ability to breathe and just suffocates them.
So our apple trees are in bloom right now, as are the pear trees. And so. I
Yeah,
don't
so
know.
wait for codling moth. Again, that Utah traps model will, when you look up the codling moth summary, it will say the eggs have been laid. In a few weeks, it'll say the eggs have been laid. You can, if you want to apply oil, apply it now.
Okay.
Okay.
And again, for that first generation, it is worth putting a couple applications of horticultural oil on for those eggs.
So again, once and then 7 to 10 days later.
Yep.
Okay. And so you're mostly talking about pear and apple as the sort of the host for the codling moths and.
Yep. And they can be in plums, but they're mainly in apple and pear.
Okay.
So another pest that I thought I'd include here is the Western cherry fruit fly. Because if you do grow cherries, these will find you. They're kind of ubiquitous and they're the main pest in both pie and sweet cherries. These are the little maggots in the cherries. They are easier to treat because there's just one generation per year. And that timing, it's on the Utah Traps site, but it's also really easy to predict based on the fruit. You're targeting the adults because the eggs are laid just under the fruit skin, and so none of the organic sprays will do anything to those eggs once they're laid. But the timing is really where the fruit is yellow to straw colored and just getting a little bit of a pink blush on it. And you will apply spinosad or an organic pyrethrin, and repeat again 7 to 10 days later, and you will control most of the maggots in the cherries with just those 2 sprays. So a little bit about small mammals and rodents, because they can be such pests in fruit trees, especially the semi-dwarf and dwarf trees or rootstocks that a lot of the trees are on now, because they're because gophers and ground squirrels and voles can eat a lot more of those roots, and the trunks are smaller, and it's easier for them to girdle those trees. So all of these can feed on the thin bark of younger trees. And pocket gophers and ground squirrels will feed on the tree roots. So here's pocket gophers, here's ground squirrels, mice, and voles. To control these things, to control rodents, especially the ones that are running around above the ground like mice and voles, reducing food and cover is really key. Mice and voles live in fear and they don't like to hang out in areas that are don't have a lot of vegetation, that are have no vegetation or mowed really short. Avoid plants favored by gophers. That includes alfalfa, Cameron. Gophers really like quackgrass and big taproots like alfalfa. That's why pocket gophers are like the biggest pest in alfalfa fields. You can do what you can to encourage predators. But we're in the West. A lot of these things just tend to be around. You can protect young trees with tubes or paint. And you should keep track of the activity so you know when it's getting to a point where you might want to manage it. We often see that signs of activity when the snow melts. When we do have snow, you'll see these bowl runs where they've made the runs in the sod, and and for the protecting trees from voles, because voles tend to do most of the real damage, like girdling trees over the winter when we have snow. Again, cover is really important. So when we have a foot or 2 of snow that's on the ground, I've seen a lot of sad trees when that snow melts and all the bark from the snow line down is just chewed off by voles because they've had that protection. If you do put hardwood cloth or tubes on it, remember they can dig, and so sink it 6 inches below the ground, and keep it higher than the maximum snow depth. And remember to take it off before the tree outgrows it. For organic management, you have mainly traps and habitat management, so keeping it clean. For voles, you want to trap along the runs and tunnels. And for voles and mice, providing some cover. Again, voles and mice live in fear. If you can provide like a pallet or a sheet of plywood that's tipped up and put the snap traps underneath, and if you're putting them along the runs, you'll get better success. Baits and poisons are used a lot by commercial orchards. They can't be used organic, but you can use it outside of organically managed areas if you have a real problem. If you have pocket gophers coming in from from neighboring alfalfa fields, you might think about just using some baits on the perimeter. There's 2 types of poison baits. Again, not organic, but possible to use them on the perimeters. And poison baits have had a bad rap, which is now a little bit less than deserved. There's acute baits. Zinc phosphide is the main. Well, they had a bad rap because they were toxins that would stay in the rodents and accumulate. So if a fox or a hawk ate that rodent, they could also be poisoned. Acute baits only target the animal that feeds on them. So these baits can be placed such that only gophers or bulls get at them. What zinc phosphide will do, which is the main acute bait, is it turns into a gas in their stomach and explodes their stomach, and then the gas dissipates. And so if something else was going to eat that, it doesn't have a risk for getting any poison. Yeah, it's a better option if it's really bad. So pocket gophers are, I think, one of the biggest menaces here in this area. They are solitary for the most part, and don't like to hang out. So one gopher will live in a burrow system that takes up about 2,000 square feet. So you might have 15 to 30 per acre in a really heavy infestation. They do prefer larger taproots. I've seen many apple trees, especially young semi-dwarf apple trees, collapse, and you go out and check the tree and it's no longer connected to the ground. It looks like it's been shoved in a pencil sharpener, because pocket gophers will find those roots. And those dwarf and semi-dwarf rootstocks are, they keep the tree small by having a really kind of runty, slow growing root system. And it just can't keep up with pocket gopher feeding. The pocket gophers will feed on larger rootstocks, but those rootstocks are vigorous enough that they can outgrow that damage and it won't completely end the tree. Gophers do really like alfalfa and quackgrass. So yeah, in a typical tunnel system, you have these, you'll see the mounds where they're just pushing dirt out for their main sort of transit tunnels, and then they'll have these deeper nesting chambers that are below that. That's important when you look to trap, because you want to look for fresh mounds. So here's new, dark, wet soil. That's how you tell it's a fresh mound. Those are the ones you want to trap, because a lot of if the mound is not active, they're not going to come up into that area. They're working on a different part of their house, their burrow system. There are many different kinds of gopher traps. To apply them, you can apply them, again, looking for those fresh mounds, and you find that lateral and you can put one trap in. If they're actively pushing soil out here, they'll run into these the trigger plates, then it snaps on to the body. These are directional traps, so they have to be facing the direction that the gopher is going to be traveling. You do want to attach them with wire or chain, so that doesn't get, so the gopher doesn't wander back into the hole and take away your trap, or a coyote doesn't grab it and walk away with your trap. If you're going to find the main tunnel systems, you do, and I think this is an effective way to do it, is you can set traps facing both directions. Again, they're directional traps. It has to walk into it and trip that trap plate from the right direction. Yeah, and they're all of these work well. We use a lot of gophinators. The Maccabee trap is also works really well. I've not tried the box trial style traps. What's stopping this? Now, for some reason, the last slide here isn't working. There's also a gopher hawk, which is another trap which is applied into these runs, which is like a new style trap that's triggered, and it's not directional, and you just kind of feel down for that soft spot in the main tunnel. And then they're nice too because beyond that being not directional, they do show when it's been triggered. There's a color indicator, and you can see it from a distance, and know you have to go and reset that. And again, with gophers, it's one per system. So if you catch one in that system, you probably just want to move on. In general, if you've put traps in an area and you don't catch anything for a couple days, move it, look for new signs of fresh activity, because they are really solitary and you just got to catch them where they're working. So those are the main organic pests that we deal with and how we manage them organically. Or the main fruit pests and how we deal with them organically. I'm happy to answer any questions about other things that I didn't talk about or anything that I did talk about.